David is the co-founder of, well, how many companies do you count? Yeah, Granite, Kalia,
Arista Networks, and there's several more in the works. AwesomeSoft, ICANN, there's a few others.
and that has had a heavy level of influence in the founding of other companies. So, well, we won't go down that path. Anyway, these are two guys that probably know something about entrepreneurship, also know something about innovation, and are both foreign born. Am I right about that?
That's great.
So here in Silicon Valley are two pretty interesting people to talk about the intersection of entrepreneurship and innovation. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So let me just lay out the ground rules. We're not going to talk about these guys' money, their families, or their political views. And I've still got to try to make it interesting. So what we are talking about is the intersection between innovation and entrepreneurship. We're going to be up here for 90 minutes. I get the first 60, and you guys get the next 30. So I'm going to do whatever I want to do the first 30, but when we turn it, first 60, but when we turn it over to you, we're going to have a couple of people that will have microphones where you can ask questions. And I'm going to try to get you to ask as many questions as possible. And logically speaking, that leads to a conclusion, which is your questions need to be short, and they need to require short answers. That way we can get a lot of people into that last 30 minutes. So try to ask fast questions that require quick answers and stick to the topic. Are we understood?
Yes.
So, for example, here are two quick questions, one each. So, David, you and Andy, this is what I read, you and Andy wrote the first $200,000 checks for Google. And being a journalist, I've kind of wandered around trying to figure out who wrote the other checks. And I think Ron Connolly wrote one of those checks. And I think Fred Gibbons wrote one of those checks. Were there other men? I think Ron Schramm wrote one of those checks. Were there any others?
Well, let's see. The Ram Shriram was one of the other checks.
Okay.
I was sworn to secrecy on
The others, okay. Okay, well then I'll tell you that the other two were...
I usually say, I'd tell you, then I'd have to kill you, but there's too many of you.
And that, by the way, is my line, because my partner used to work for the CIA. But, and so Ken, just to demonstrate the essence of a short question with a really short answer is, why the hell didn't you make me do the Series A for Fortinet?
Probably more my problem is that I don't quite recognize your strong background and all the other things.
That was good. So when you guys start asking questions, you've got the model right here, which is don't answer the question at all. So anyway, I'm an investor. I have been an investor for 15 years now. Prior to that, I was a journalist, as was described. And so I have spent the better part of my life trying to figure out this basic question, which is, who are the kind of people that lead to creating successful companies? And what's the intersection with being innovative in that environment? In other words, what is the intersection between innovation and entrepreneurship? So what I've decided to do is to get you guys, to employ you guys to help me figure out the answer to that question. And that's what we're going to be spending the next hour or so trying to do. So first of all, I'm going to start with Ken in this particular question and ask both of you. Could you define innovation for me?
That's quite a big term, I think. For me, just try to do something maybe a little bit different.
Okay. Another great thing when you're asking a question is,
that's
when you answer a question is redefine the question.
And also kind of more easy to do because I am in the network security space. It's lucky not in the semiconductor or some other space which need a lot of money, a lot of people, technology to do it. So that's where for me really is network security. You can program something, whether firewall, block some attack, whatever. That's very, very easy. So that's where 20 years ago I tried to start in this one, try to make some money. Because for me, I come from China, my parents are professors, they don't make much money, so that's where I try to get something, learn something myself. That's where the consulting starting getting things going.
So innovation is product of greed? No. A desire to make money. I mean, this is something that's debated and has been debated for years.
Yeah, later probably try to get more people involved, so I don't have to work that hard to make all money myself.
Right.
That's the way starting for the teams that gets it going. But I have to say the first one really pretty unsuccessful. Kind of come from engineering background, we have no business training, don't know how to deal with customer, don't know how to sell, don't know how to market, and also don't know how to deal with the investor.
Yeah.
So that's where the things we learn in the first few years.
Right.
Eventually, probably make it more easy
Right.
later.
Okay. David?
Well, I think innovation, I think, has been kind of an overused term in the business world, but I think, you know, there's a simplistic definition, which is you do things in a new way, and this doesn't sound very impressive, especially if you're a biologist, where you realize that most mutations are harmful, but new things. You know, I look at it that innovation is so valuable because the opposite is you do things in the same old way over and over again. And reminded of this program I saw about Neanderthals, where the anthropologist concluded that Neanderthals lived the same way for 250,000 years. And, you know, it's essentially, well, this club and this rock was good enough for my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, so it's good enough for me. And what would happen to them? I think the great thing about innovation is you get to do new things. And I would say, for me, innovation is wonderful just because the opposite is so boring.
You sound like a product of Silicon Valley. I know you come from Vancouver, but...
Yeah.
So, David's talking about innovation representing change, you know, something different, something new. And you talked about being motivated, in other words, to improve yourself, and that was sort of the essence of innovation. How much was new in the case of each of the three companies? Ken?
That's where my first company is kind of we do the software firewall.
Right.
There's quite a lot of companies also do similar things, software firewall. That's where we see not much difference on the product side. That's where kind of I think that's one of the reasons, not just many other reasons. That's where in the second company, NetScreen and also the third company, we try to do different than how other people do in security, pretty much all in the software. So we think if we can do something different in the chip. So that's probably different than others. Because for us, really, like I said, we don't have advantage in the sales or marketing or whatever, some other cultural background or all these things. So we try to do something different, which the other people not quite there yet. So that's probably can make us more easy to sell to the customer base.
So in the case of both NetScreen and Fortinet, what you're saying is that the innovation was you embedded the functionality from the software in the chip in order to gain performance and difference from other
Yes,
people.
exactly. That's more different than all the others. Because so far, it's pretty much most of the security companies still do in the software. So for us, if we can put the software into the chip, can make it faster, can make it more reliable. So that's the one we try to add additional difference beyond whatever the software function.
All right.
So that's make it relatively more easy
All right.
to sell. But that's the difference we have. Function-wise, all the same.
All right.
Just we put in the chip, make it a bit faster.
All right. So then, David, let me come back and say, so you're sitting on Andy's porch. This is what I read, that you were sitting on Andy Bechtolson's porch, and you both wrote a check for $100,000.
He was sitting on my porch.
On your porch? Well, he didn't have a porch.
No, he doesn't have a, he has a Porsche.
So, to whatever degree you can, you're sitting there, and Larry and Sergey, you know, I think they've already built the software, and I think it's already running. And,
Yeah, they're demoing it on their front porch.
So they're there.
Yeah.
So what was the innovation that you perceived at that moment in time? Just as a way of kind of getting at that question of innovation.
Well, I think, just to put this in context, this was 1998, and, you know, the thing that, do I have to keep this a short answer?
No, you can have long answers. They have to ask the questions that lead the short answers.
You know, I've had people say, well, how did you have this opportunity to invest in Google, and yet it wasn't obvious at the time. So, and, you know, for a few years after that, people thought it was silly to invest in Google.
No, I'll put a finer point on it, because when I heard about the financing, unfortunately I was not offered it, so I don't have to admit that I didn't invest in Google. But when Kleiner and Sequoia both did the deal at $100 million post money for $12.5 million each, people were going, what? There's like all these search engines out there, why are they doing Google? So that was the context at the time.
Yeah, so in 1998, I'd already had, one of my former students was a founder of Excite. It was, you know, one of the early search engines, and much predating Google, and these things had wandered into the space that was known as internet portals at the time. The conclusion was by the business people that you couldn't make money from search, you had to turn it into essentially an online newspaper, so there's sports and ads and all that sort of stuff, and news and human interest stuff and all that sort of thing, and then search was off the corner, and it was, I think, compromised search, either not really invested in by a bunch of the companies at the time. So the common wisdom was search was not a business. Now, to me, search is an incredibly important function, and anybody who studied computing, you find that search is a big part of what you learn how to do, and if you actually understand what computers do, they spend a lot of time searching for things. And at that time, it was clear that the internet and the web was growing at an enormous rate. It had gone from, I've been involved in the internet since 1981 or 80, and so, you know, it was a time when I felt like I know most of the people on the internet.
There was an internet in 1981?
Yeah.
Gold internet.
And so, yeah, it's kind of funny because it was, I think until the early 90s, it was not allowed to have any commercial activity on the internet. You know, you have to feel like a dinosaur recounting how the Mesozoic era was. But so in that world, I'd seen things go from where I knew where to find things on the internet, since it was so small, to having trouble finding it and using Yahoo and so on, and having trouble finding things, even though what was there was growing at an enormous rate. And so I was losing the ability to find information on the internet, and along comes Larry and Sergey with a solution that works extraordinarily well. And I like to tell people the first Google search I ever did was Canadian exchange rate, and it gave me more information than I knew about the Canadian dollar than I ever imagined, and so I figured this had to be valued. Yes, and it was also fast. And I think the combination of being good and fast and tackling something that's been a core problem, you might view for computing and maybe for mankind, namely search for what you are after, just meant there had to be a lot of value there.
So you know now, of course, that search is the new target because Google is the new Excite. Anyway, so that's interesting. You both come up with different answers to the question of define innovation, at least in the sense of, you know, betting software in silicon, or, you know, finding a different approach.
Interesting. You also the early investor of TiVo. That's really the technology I like a lot. That's really the father of a lot of other things happening today. So
Yeah.
What's your
Questions too?
He's good. Well, he didn't even ask permission. That would mean he's an entrepreneur. I think you're more like a professor, right?
I have an exam prepared for you.
That's why it's fun to hang out on stage with billionaires. Not necessarily play by the rules. So the answer to your question, Ken, is we invested in the company before it was TiVo. We actually invested in the people. So that's a different area of topic and one that would be interesting in a different environment. So to see how I'm turning this question around, which is how do investors make the decision to invest? Which is a really interesting question, and that's why I started out by asking, why didn't you make me do the investment in Fortinet? So, okay, second set of questions here. Second question for both of you is, define entrepreneurship. And I'll start with David, since you are one, and well, I don't know, I guess you are one too.
Boy, this is a harder one. I think the conventional definition is somebody who starts a new business enterprise and presumably carries it some distance. I think, to me, I have this more abstract notion of entrepreneur, which is that everybody should be an entrepreneur, that you have certain value you bring to the society and you try and develop yourself to have, usually called marketable skills and so on, so that you bring value to the society, and the society, we live in a society which is very good at rewarding people for valuable skills. And so I think an entrepreneur is somebody who thinks in those terms of what value am I bringing, and am I bringing this in a way that should give me the rewards that I'm after. And I don't view this purely as financial rewards. I think some people work hard to develop their value in society so that they can be engaged in things that they enjoy doing, or they're challenged to do, or they like doing, and so on. And I think that thinking needs to carry over to a company where there's a notion that you want to do something that's bigger than yourself, and it's beyond. I think this is sort of rather than being a personal entrepreneur, you need to be able to carry that notion of building value and having a way for society to recognize that value, which incorporates not just what you do, but what a whole team of people is going to do. And I think it's that extension of yourself which makes a real entrepreneur, is to carry a group of people forward and bring that value to society.
So part of what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, is we all have a little bit of entrepreneur in us. Some go further with it, some go really far with it, and so entrepreneurship is kind of an elemental thing that has to be combined with other things to create a result.
Yeah, I guess I would only quibble. I don't think I would say everybody's an entrepreneur. I would say everybody should be an entrepreneur, at least a personal entrepreneur, but I'm sure we've all encountered people who view that I had this checklist of things, and now the world owes me a living, and I got a degree, from the right school, and I got good grades, now you owe me a living, and there's been no thinking about, well, okay, somebody is going to have to figure out how to extract
You
those.
said we didn't want to talk about politics. I'm happy to go down that. I think you're talking about entitlement anyway.
Well, I think, without getting to politics, I think there's entitlement thinking and then there's earning thinking. And I think entrepreneurs think about, how do I earn the customer's business? How do I earn my job? All of those things. And to me, we should think, how do we earn our job? And then when you want to be a corporate entrepreneur, you say, how does this company earn this set of customers to make it viable?
So Ken, I'll ask the same question.
Since first I agree how David said, and then for me, I feel the entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs two part. First, you probably need to build something or create something, whether the product or the service or anything you feel can be innovation or different things. I hope. So that's the first part. And the second part, you also need to sell it to the other or share with the other or whatever, make it exchange some value, all these kind of things. For us, really come from engineering background, is all trained quite well how to build something. What we don't know actually much, that's we have to learn a lot. I think happy to go to Stanford because they also is the school really teaching a lot of lot of professors start their own company, even the president of Stanford also started his own company before. So that's the part we learn how to get a second part, sell whatever you build to the others, to the community, whatever, and then hope make some money. So that's the two part need to be combined together. I think I kind of agree. Most of people also have this both skill and how to combine together, and also how to dedicate and focus, eventually make it larger and larger. So that's really the key. A lot of people probably the things they build may not quite finish, or something like the selling part not still large enough. But if you can combine these two things and also make it dedicate last longer, eventually maybe people will call you entrepreneur.
Sounds like a right or an honor to be called an entrepreneur. So I should know this about your background, but did you come here to start the first company, SIS, or did you come here and then discover the opportunity?
I come here really to study. That's where my parents try to hey, maybe the ideal job will be a professor. So, but for me, it's interesting, really. We are in the right time, the right space with all the right people. That's where kind of the internet somehow is changing so much, and that's where I kind of get interested in this internet space and play around all these kind of things. Like I say, first try to do some consulting job, and then that's make some money, or in the case that the good part of the money, then okay, let's how to make a little bit more. That's starting building the product, and then eventually try to form the company. So that's the part starting rolling and never stop.
And you're still working on that.
I think that's the other part really. Once you start something, sometimes when's the time to really to start or whatever really fully retire all this kind of thing. For me right now, it's really there's so many people working together. It's a whole big team there, and we all try to do something different going forward. That's make you dragging here. You keep doing it.
Yeah.
So that's the part that start here.
So part of the reason I asked that question, and part of the context I was asking is I did work in Inc. Magazine. It was the first kind of real job I had, and Inc. Magazine was about starting companies, and it was founded in 1979. And when I worked there, I didn't have any idea about either technology or business. I didn't know much of anything, which has never stopped me. So I tried to understand entrepreneurship, and I discovered there were 4 professors of entrepreneurship in the country. So part of the context for being here now in 2012 and talking about this intersection between innovation and entrepreneurship is that 40 years ago, 35 years ago, entrepreneurship was not actually something people acknowledged as something you could do. It was, in fact, many people thought it was kind of a scummy thing to do, and most people that were thought of as entrepreneurs probably sold you used cars and did other things like that. Now we celebrate entrepreneurship. We're sitting here talking about it. And that was part of the context I was looking for as we've developed now, and I'm mindful of what you were talking about, David, and wonder whether you've seen that sort of process happen around entrepreneurship. And
I'm sorry, I'm confused. What's the process of more
going over time, yeah, that now we celebrate entrepreneurship and now celebrate entrepreneurship. Is it really a new concept, do you think, or is it, I'm not sure what question I'm asking you. Otherwise, I'll just move on to the next question.
Well, I think that I can give 2 answers here. I think that the internet has created some, let me call them rock stars, who have gotten a tremendous amount of attention. So as you know, kids almost, you'd say, here's some guy who's 26 years old and is a multi-billionaire. You've seen this several times, and most of us say, well, Warren Buffett's got billions of dollars, but he's 86 years old, so there's not a lot of envy involved here, I think. But when somebody's 26, they've got billions of dollars, so it gets a lot of attention there. So I think, in that sense, I think entrepreneurship has gained a lot of visibility just because this phenomenon we've seen of people getting spectacular financial success very early in their career, but the part that I think hasn't changed enough is that, you know, for all these successes, that isn't the industry. There's a lot of small companies that make important contributions to even the big companies' success. And they're entrepreneurs that founded these companies, and in many cases, they're almost more my heroes than the people that are the successful one, because if I can use my own dad as an example, he founded an engineering firm, and he had to use his own savings. There was no VC, he had no salary. He ended up borrowing, mortgaging his own house to pay the salaries of the draftsmen, and I feel like it was much easier for me than it was for him to start companies. And I think even now, my understanding of the statistics is most of the new job growth in the United States comes from small companies. And it's, you know, there's a small number of Googles and Facebooks and so on. There's a large number of these others, and there's a whole bunch of unsung heroes there that we should really acknowledge are contributing a tremendous amount by the entrepreneurship there.
So Ken, and part of what David's saying is it's become easier in this part. Actually, that was the question I was asking. Has it become easier? So do you think it is easier if you moved to here from China now in 2010? Would you have made SIS a more successful company? I'm trying to get at the idea that is it easier to start companies now and to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it is. That's where compared to 20 years ago, I started my first company. There's no this kind of observation like whether Churchill or Esther can go there try to learn how to do the business, all these kinds of things. Compared to now, it's connectivity happens pretty much every week, every day. So that's where starting company now is entrepreneurship, whatever, compared to before 20 years ago. We feel we are more socially connected, both on whatever getting started and running, and also on the VC funding side, and even try to build a product. That's kind of a much more connected compared to like 20 years ago. Because when I tried to start 20 years ago myself with the company, really pretty much as a few friends try to work together, and we try to get some other people help give us some advice on how to like market a product, how to sell, how to get money there. Pretty much cannot find much there. Compared to now, I think we do see a lot of companies here also start. It's really from our first day, they connect the right investor, they have the team built out quite well, and also with all the right organization try to help them. So that's probably quite different than 20 years ago. That's I feel can be more. If you have the right product, you can get company grow much quicker, successful much quicker, and also could be more competition because more people can easily start company. But on the other side, you also can be more successful much quicker compared to before.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about location sensitivity for entrepreneurship. You know, there's clearly a perception for ourselves being Americans, that you know we kind of rule the world of entrepreneurship and we rule the world of innovation. That the intersection between innovation and entrepreneurship happens right here in Silicon Valley, and there are instances of it in different parts of the U.S. and now there's beginning to be more and more instances. Just talk a little bit about how you feel, and I'll start with Ken because he came from there, but how you feel about innovation and entrepreneurship in China or in any other part of the world. You came from China, not the other part of the world.
Yeah, it's also because all the communication, all the travel, whatever technology make the world much smaller, all kind of working together. For us, really, is a company has over 1,600 people. It's located quite globally. So we have like 400 people here. There's another 700 people in Vancouver. There's some other in China, in France, in India, in Japan, UK. It's kind of the global location gave that's where from the very beginning, how to position globally, kind of probably will make it more easy to success. And also when we launched the product almost 10 years ago, we also try to launch globally. Most US companies really go US first and then expanding beyond. So for us, we feel it's a quite successful experience really launch globally and then end up with each region like US, Europe, Asia, each is about 1/3 of the business. So that's also kind of the global and the location I feel is quite helpful.
So I'm going to follow that up, but first I'll ask you, so you come from Vancouver. I know that they're not the 51st state. Even if we think. The Canadians are not famous for starting companies. Canada is not famous as a place for innovation. I'm just trying to stimulate a response to it.
Well, I think there's a lot more innovation in Canada than is recognized in the United States. But I think that, and I think one of the things that I find dazzling in Silicon Valley is I've made the somewhat rude comment, a number of companies, that who's our token American, because usually most of the people are foreign born that are involved in anything I've been in, and it just happens that way. And, I think from a location standpoint, I think that there's kind of a unique set of circumstances that have drawn people in computing from all over the world here. And I think I would come at it from almost the opposite. Ken was focusing on the ability to be global, and that's all true. But to me, one of the most critical elements in building a company is to know what's happening. Because when you start a company, you're not building for today, you're building for some version of tomorrow. And the most dangerous thing is to get blindsided by something along the way here. And I hate to cite Research in Motion, RIM, BlackBerry as an example of that, but I think the reality is that the computing community is still a village, and that the village is located here, and that when you're here, you can end up walking down University Avenue in Palo Alto and overhear somebody say something or run into somebody or other, and it's not going to be in the press for months, but this is something you needed to hear. This is somebody you needed to run into. And I think it's that sort of little cauldron of things that are happening that gives you a sense of what's happening next that is so important, that allows companies, that draws people here, and also allows companies to be building for what's next as opposed to what's now, or what was actually competing with yesterday, which isn't a great thing to do.
Yeah, so this is kind of what, thank you, that was excellent. You kind of set me up to go back and say, so, everything we've heard about China, the massive expansion of the economy there, and the sort of the expansion of the middle class, the number of entrepreneurs, the amount of business being done, would imply that at some level you should be concerned that Fortinet's primary competitor is being born in China now. You don't necessarily know who they are, but that's going to happen. Do you have any concern that, that kind of innovation will happen actually in China and come back this way?
It's really dependent on the space, the area, the market. I think like in all, like the internet space, that's still the most advanced technology. The innovation is all in here. So that's probably what we also have a huge advantage even leading going forward, especially come from a great university, all these things. There's some other maybe some other technology like certain mobile phone or some other things which probably has bigger market there. There's also a lot of innovation happening over there because they fit their market. One thing about, because I also know quite some entrepreneurs in China, is some of them really kind of only focus on their own market. They're not quite, they feel that's probably, and it's not fit my philosophy. I want to see it more global.
Yeah.
So that's eventually will be the technology, all these kind of things. And that's where if you only limit to certain local, especially in the high-tech and internet space, I feel eventually probably the more global is you have more competition, and then from the competition they do a better and better product. So that's, I always need to have some competitor to do better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, since we spend on a lot.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I would rather like a more global competition and reach things better.
So since we're on the topic and without getting into politics, how much of both entrepreneurship and innovation is cultural? I mean, is it possible for China to produce innovative entrepreneurs? I'm trying not to be culturally biased about it, but you know, for companies that are introducing genuinely new kinds of technologies or fundamental change to happen in China and be, you know, born over there and come back the other way. And the irony is what you were saying just now about China is what everybody always said about America, that we always had our own market, that we could exist, and we didn't have to move overseas in order to be successful. And that phenomena is true, but that used to be true of the US, so you could forecast that perhaps China will figure that out too.
I think in certain areas, like China today is probably the biggest internet company for 10 cents. They do something they call QQ. That's the phenomenon happening in China. That's the area I think they're kind of you might innovate something kind of different because that fit their market well. But in the other majority area, they are still way behind all these Western world, all these kind of things. That's where they still need to whether learning or whatever, all these kind of things. So I don't see much innovation. At least they starting to get closer to whatever the level here. That's probably will be something can innovate starting coming. But before that, probably most of them still just try to learn what they did from here. But it's on the idea of innovation. Most of the Chinese they like to try something, so that's where kind of compares to some other different cultural background. Some of the cultural background, sometimes people like to whatever just some other Asian country they just like to follow whatever be the whole group do the same thing. But in China, putting other words, sometimes I come from Beijing in China, but in China sometimes they also say more like a small Europe because the people I would say from Beijing, in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, in some other places, they have kind of different language, different food, different kind of cultural background. So that's the kind of a part mixing sometimes with some internal competition going on between different part of the China. So that's making some people like to always keep trying to compete something or whatever. So that's the part kind of similar like some Europe has different country there. So from that point of view, the culture also I have to say is different part of China, different culture. But I would say it's still way behind what in the US in a lot of technology.
I'm not going to come back and bang on you about Canada, but, well, a little bit. We'll make this one quick answer. How much do you think the size of the country has to do? I mean, we're sitting here talking about the US, which is 340 million people, or China, which I think is over 2 billion.
1.3 billion.
1.3? I thought it was closer to anyway. Well, lost track. I know India is over 1 billion. And those are the countries that people mention when they talk huge marketplaces, you know, relatively wealthy or increasingly wealthy middle class, and you know, the infrastructure, universities, and such like. Is Canada at a permanent disadvantage because it only has 25 million? 35 million. And Australia's 20, and New Zealand's 4, and Israel is 4. And when you think about these countries that also have a fairly well-developed economy and well-educated population, but just don't have the population to support the founding of big companies. Is that a factor?
Well, I think it is a factor, but I think, if I can go back to your discussion, is it easier to start a company? As Ken was saying, maybe easier to start a company isn't necessarily good. make it successful, and so you do find that there's a lot of companies in Canada that have been started by Canadian entrepreneurs that have been very successful, but there's not many, or maybe there's not any that have had the visibility of Google or Facebook and so on. So I think that I would view it more that if you're looking for these outlier sort of successes, that in a larger population, a larger sort of native market, just gives you a higher probability that you're going to have a rock star that's going to hit the ball out of the park, so to speak, because that's a mixed metaphor. But again, I'm perhaps more on the side that if you start a company in Canada and you end up being a millionaire or multi-millionaire, which, there's lots and lots of examples of this, including my own father, then, you've been very successful by almost all standards, and you're a happy person, you feel like you've succeeded. And personally, I don't think that sort of flippant to say, well, once you get beyond a few million, it doesn't make a big difference, but I think that's the reality. I think people I know that have been successful, the satisfaction comes from making a success, and the money is nice, but I think even Andy Beckelsheim was comment to me, it's surprising how little money you actually need to live on, that paid off the mortgage and so on, and unless you're an extravagant person, it doesn't take much. So I think we should again recognize that lots of other countries have real successes there, and I think that in the same sense, if you look at the U.S. and you say, I think there's this patch of ground that used to be fruit orchards that consumes 80 or 60 or 80% of the venture capital in the United States, and so it's like an oasis in the middle of not quite a desert, but the U.S. is not a great example here. In some ways, as a country, the Silicon Valley is a spectacular example.
So I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. Now, what I want to do is, I have a list of people that I can enumerate. I want you to contribute to the list, and so I'll just name them off. Whoever's in charge of all you, I clearly have feedback from. Let me know if I'm doing something wrong. There. Now you can't hear me. No, that's great. Excellent. So I'm just going to name them out, and we'll just go maybe a little bit of a Rorschach test. But so here are entrepreneurs that if I just called on, I can just roll them off the top of my head. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Fred Smith. You know who Fred Smith is? He founded FedEx. Howard Schultz, most people know. Add to that list. Give me 3 people that you think belong in that I can already name.
I'd put Andy Beckelsheim in that list.
Andy as an entrepreneur.
Yes.
I said give me 3.
By myself?
No.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm trying. It's a bit of a game, but I'm trying to figure out what comes to mind when you think of great entrepreneurs.
Well, I think I tended to say Len Bozak is one of the founders of Cisco. He didn't sort of carry it.
Carry forward, yeah.
Maybe stay the company beyond being. Can we say screwed over by VCs?
Sure. Go ahead. Name the VCs is pretty member, but unfortunately I wasn't one of them.
Yeah, they did better than he did. So, well, I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody obvious, but let's see who else. Let me name Diane Green as the founder of VMware.
Yeah.
As another.
There's 3. Okay. Ken?
I think it's moving in this IT space is definitely Microsoft still okay. He built something and then he also put it.
But he already had named him.
Yeah, let's come up with a new one. Put him on the spot. The thing I'm trying to get at is what is.
He wasn't a good student.
He wasn't a good student. He said that. No.
Michael Dell computer.
Michael Dell, but it was excellent.
He's really he built like the operation model.
Yeah.
That's also
fact, you never raised money from the venture capitalist either.
I think if we don't have to get money from it, that's usually the best.
And Jim Clark, of course, is another good one. I'll steal that from
There you go. I didn't name Jim, that's true. Silicon Rockets, Escape, and Healthy. The thing I'm trying to get at is kind of what is it that leads to being, for an entrepreneur to be innovative. And, you know, at some level, the way that we've been talking about innovation, it's almost impossible to be a really great entrepreneur without being technical, because we've been talking about technology being the domain of innovation. So I wonder, that'll be kind of my last question before I turn it over, but do you think it's a requirement to be a technical person to innovate?
I wish it
That's to
was.
be a great entrepreneur, I guess would be the right way to put it.
Well, I have this bias that I must admit, when you look at Larry and Sergey, and look at Bill Gates, and Andy Bechtolsheim, and all these, a whole bunch of the people that we've named, Jim Clark, another great example, that they're all technical people. And I think that one of the things that I think is exciting, and again, this is just really my bias here, is that we're obviously, all of these things we're concerned about are in high technology, and I think you need to have a good grip of the technology to figure out where you have a competitive advantage, where the technology is going, and how you can figure this out. But I think there's another element at work, which is that in computing, we get trained about how to optimize information processing, and to me, a business is an information processing engine. And I think Google is a good example of a new type of company. It's, there's a number of those, but these companies are moving at a faster pace than we've ever seen companies move before. They're processing information in different ways, and this is being driven by this, in my bias, it's driven by this computational thinking, which has just accelerated everything. The famous data-driven approach to decision-making at Google isn't really because the data is pushing things along, it's because they understand how to use computers to process enormous amounts of information to have a better basis for making decisions faster. And I think that's accelerated the pace of businesses. And you can move faster and move faster without tripping. That leads to success.
I think, like I said earlier, the entrepreneur is the two part. The first part, you need to build something, and the second part, you need to sell it. So I think for me, the engineer training is really first how to build something. That's where if you really want to be more successful, really need to do something different. That's the innovation. So that's where you may try to looking at whatever company you see, you really need to build some strong technology product, try to build something different. But I would say the other part also important, some kind of innovation in the how to sell it, business model is also kind of important. So that's you need to have both innovation in building the technology product, and also if you also can combine some of the other things, advantage in the selling things, that's the two things combined that you really call the culture. That could be the innovation of the culture. So that's why whether you have something in the product or you have something in the business model or it's more kind of some kind of more innovation, open culture compared to some other model in some other different companies, which more operation oriented. So that's these are two, three part. Eventually, I think you need to have the innovation to be more successful than the other previous company, so you can become the leader, be a new leader of the space.
So I'm going to ask one more question, but we have two ladies with microphones.